For as long as we've been around, death has always been that final, unanswerable question, the great unknown. But what if it wasn't? Let's dive into this really fascinating thought experiment. What would the world look like if death wasn't the end, but was actually a scientifically proven next step? Just think about that for a second. Death is no longer a final verdict handed down by nature or some higher power. It's just a change, a transition. Can you imagine what that one single undeniable fact would do to, well, everything? To our civilizations, to our beliefs, to how we even think about being alive? Now, to be super clear, we're not talking about faith or belief here. The whole scenario we're exploring is about a massive civilizational shock. What happens if we get cold, hard scientific proof that consciousness, the thing that makes you you, survives physical death? Not as a religious promise, but as a verifiable fact of the universe, like gravity. And what does that proof even look like? Well, the source material calls it verifiable communication. And this isn't some vague feeling or a weird dream. We're talking about undeniable data, consistent, recordable evidence that your memories, your personality, your essential self just keeps on going and can even be contacted. So what's the first domino to fall? It would be absolutely seismic. The very architecture of many of the world's biggest religions, built up over thousands of years, would pretty much become obsolete overnight. Not because of some attack, not out of malice, but just because their main function, being the gatekeepers to the afterlife, wouldn't be needed anymore. I mean, think about it. When you replace the mystery of eternity with data, the whole power structure built on that mystery has to change, right? But to really get a handle on how huge this shock would be, we kind of have to back up a little. We need to understand the system that's about to be shaken to its core. How did we even build our modern relationship with death in the first place? Way back, before the rise of the big monotheistic religions, the spiritual world was seen totally differently. It wasn't some cosmic courtroom where you were judged. It was more like a vast, unseen territory, filled with all kinds of gods, ancestral spirits, and forces of nature. An invisible world you lived alongside, not one you had to pass a test to get into. This really lays out the whole shift perfectly. We went from a world with lots of spirits and a wild territory that you could explore to a world with a single, all-powerful God. And in that new world, death became an entrance exam, a final judgment with consequences that last forever. This one idea became the bedrock of social and moral order for billions of people. And it's that bedrock, that very foundation, that is about to be completely shattered. This is the moment of impact, where centuries of faith collide with a single, world-altering fact. So picture it. You wake up one morning, and this is the headline on every screen in the world. It's been announced. It's been verified by scientists everywhere. It's undeniable. Life after death is a scientific reality. What happens the next day? Well, the source suggests the reactions would be all over the map. For a faith like Islam, which has such a strong focus on a final day of judgment, this kind of ongoing communicable survival would be a huge shock. You'd probably see initial rejection, and then maybe mystical branches like Sufism would be the ones to adapt and make sense of it. Judaism, with its more ambiguous view on the afterlife, might see less of a structural crisis. In fact, mystical traditions like Kabbalah could see a huge resurgence. And Buddhism? It might be the least affected of all. It might actually be strengthened, with many seeing this as just empirical proof of what they've been talking about for centuries: consciousness and rebirth. Okay, so beyond the big picture impact on institutions, what would this communication actually look like? The source gives us a few speculative cases to help us wrap our heads around it. Now, it's really important to see these next few slides for what they are. They are thought experiments from the source. They're visual ideas of what this verifiable communication could be. In this case, literally, faces appearing out of the static on a television screen. So get this. This is the case of Bio. On the left, you see a photo of him from his life. On the right, that's the image said to be him after he passed away, forming out of digital noise. And the key detail here, according to the source, is that he actually looks younger, which suggests a state of consciousness that's free from the physical problems he had at the end of his life. And now, take a look at Federico. You have to look really closely at his face. The TV static itself seems to be rising up to form the very distinct shape of his mustache. The theory is that it's super specific, verifiable details just like this that would be the key to lending credibility, to moving this whole thing from a weird anomaly to actual evidence. Okay, so if this all turned out to be real, it would change so much more than just religion. It would fundamentally change us. It would give all of humanity a brand new purpose. And this leads us to a really crucial question. I mean, so much of our society's morality is built on the idea of divine punishment, right? The idea that you'll be judged after you die. If that whole system of control just collapses, what on earth happens to our ethics? Well, in this new world, our ethics would be forced to mature. Morality wouldn't come from a fear of being punished anymore. It would have to come from a deep, internal understanding of our own persistent consciousness. Spirituality itself would do a complete 180. It would stop being vertical, a God commanding from on high. It would become horizontal, a vast, interconnected plane of consciousness that we are all a part of, one that's constantly evolving. And in a really wild twist, all of this futuristic science would actually bring us back to our most ancient human roots. The destination isn't some heaven you have to earn your way into. It's a spiritual ecosystem that you're already a part of, a dynamic, living reality that we can finally begin to explore and map out. And that leaves us with this final, incredibly powerful thought. In this new world, our entire role gets a rewrite. We would no longer be just subjects, waiting for judgment in some heavenly kingdom. We would become something way more active, way more profound. We'd become explorers of consciousness itself. And what we might discover out there, well, that's the biggest question of all.